Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep today into something quite dramatic you shared with us, this major natural disaster in Switzerland.
That's right. In the Lutschenel Valley, focused on the village of Blatten.
Exactly, Blatten. So we've got these articles, these reports. What's our mission here? What are we trying to figure out from this material?
Well, the idea is really to, cut through the noise and understand what the sources say actually happened and, crucially, why it happened.
And the impact, too, right? The implications.
Absolutely. What do these reports tell us about the immediate aftermath and maybe the longer-term picture?
And I have to say, digging into this, there are some details that were genuinely surprising. It wasn't just a straightforward rock slide, was it?
No, not at all. Far from it. The sources really describe a very specific, powerful trigger. It seems it started around 3:13 p.m., May 28th,
Okay.
with this massive rockfall off the Klein Nestorn Mountain.
Massive meaning.
Well, the figure mentioned is around 9 million tons of rock, just crashing down.
9 million tons.
Yeah.
That's almost impossible to visualize. So what happens when that much rock hits a glacier? Because it landed on the Birch Glacier, right?
Yeah, exactly. And according to these reports, that's the critical part. The impact didn't just, stop the rock. It actually destabilized the glacier itself.
How so?
The sheer force, the pressure, it triggered a colossal avalanche.
Yeah.
But this wasn't just rock anymore. It was rock mixed with ice and glacial debris.
Okay. So the disaster became this combination, the initial rockfall plus this huge glacier collapse it caused.
Precisely. And it was that combined mass, ice, rock, debris that surged down into the valley below.
And hit Blatten.
It buried about 90% of Blatten, yes, and also a nearby hamlet called Reed, according to the sources.
These descriptions are just staggering. They talk about debris deposits stretching over 2 kilometers and up to 100 meters high in places.
Yeah, it basically erased a huge section of the valley floor. Just incredible destructive power when these systems interact.
It really is. But, amidst all this destruction, the sources also highlight something positive, a real success story in a way.
They do, and it's about the warnings, the monitoring.
Right, the evacuation.
Yep.
That seems to be a major point in these reports.
Absolutely. A crucial decision was made days earlier, back on May 19th, to evacuate the village.
Days before it happened.
Yes. So around 300 residents, plus their livestock, were moved out safely. That level of preparedness, that response, it clearly saved lives. A huge takeaway.
Yeah, definitely. But there's also a tragic element mentioned.
There is, unfortunately. The sources mention a 64-year-old shepherd. He's unaccounted for.
Oh, no.
Yeah, believed to have been outside the main evacuation zone when the avalanche hit. It's a really sobering detail.
Yeah, it really is. And the impacts didn't stop at the avalanche path itself, did they? There was flooding, too.
That's right. The debris blocked the Lonza River, basically creating a dam.
So a lake formed behind it.
Exactly. And that lake then caused flooding in parts of the village that the initial slide hadn't even touched directly, just compounding the disaster.
And the danger isn't over yet. The sources mention ongoing risks.
Yes, they do. They indicate there are still unstable areas up on the mountain, potentially several 100,000 cubic meters of rock still at risk.
Wow. So continuous monitoring is essential.
Absolutely critical.
Okay, so we have this sequence. Rockfall, glacier collapse, massive avalanche, devastation, successful evacuation but with a tragedy, flooding, ongoing risk. But you said the sources go deeper into the why.
Yes, and this is where I think the deep dive gets really interesting, because the reports point pretty directly at climate change as the main driver.
Okay, how so?
Well, they describe two key processes, both linked to rising temperatures that kind of combine to create these conditions.
Right. What are they?
First, permafrost thaw. The permanently frozen ground high up that acts like cement holding rock together.
Yeah.
As temperatures rise, that thaws. It weakens the whole rock structure, making these huge rock falls, like the one that started this, much more likely.
Okay, so warming literally loosens the mountain. What's the second factor?
It's about the Birch Glacier itself. The sources mention something interesting. In the years before this collapse, the glacier had actually advanced a bit.
Advanced. Gotten bigger.
About 50 meters, yeah. Partly because debris accumulating on its surface insulated it somewhat. But this added mass, this change dynamic, it seems to made the glacier itself more unstable, more prone to a catastrophic collapse when something like that massive rockfall hit it.
Wow, so it's like a double whammy from climate change, weakening the rock above and changing the stability of the glacier below. That's complex.
It really shows the interconnectedness, doesn't it? Both factors driven by the warming trend.
Do the sources mention the current response beyond monitoring?
Yeah, briefly. They talk about using advanced tech for the monitoring, obviously. and managing water levels downstream in the Furden Reservoir to handle flood risks. And the Swiss government has pledged significant aid for recovery.
Okay, so let's try and summarize the picture we get from these reports. You have this huge rockfall, likely triggered by climate change, thawing the permafrost.
Right. Which then slams into a glacier, also made less stable by changing conditions, again linked to climate.
Triggering this absolutely devastating avalanche that buries most of a village.
But crucially, most lives were saved thanks to effective early warnings and evacuation. A real testament to preparedness.
Even with that sad note about the missing shepherd and the ongoing risks that remain?
Exactly. So Blatten becomes this really stark example, according to these sources, of how global climate change isn't some abstract thing. It translates into very specific, very dangerous local events. It's the interplay of these systems, all nudged by warming.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? About communities living in these amazing mountain landscapes. If places we thought were stable for generations are becoming, well, unstable, how do people adapt?
How do you balance living in a place you cherish, like the Loschental, with these growing risks? That's a huge question.
And maybe one final thought for you listening. Considering how well the evacuation worked in Blatten, but also understanding the deep causes the permafrost, the glacier changes, what does this specific event tell us about the need for preparedness, for resilience, and other vulnerable mountain regions worldwide?
Yeah. Are other places looking at these same interconnected risks? Are they ready?
Yeah.
Definitely something to mull over.